So if you watched my video from the other day, you'll remember that I started that video by recounting a proposition that I had with another baseball writer, basically where I said I'll run a certain amount of miles for every run that was scored in Wednesday's game against the Chicago Cubs. The Giants obviously end up beating the Cubs 13-2. So my task was to run 15 miles. And I have never ran 15 miles in my life. I have ran some halves. So it was definitely going to be a little bit of a challenge. But as evidenced by this screenshot right here, I did in fact run the 15 miles. I thought, considering I'd never ran at least that far, it wasn't a crazy jump because, again, I've ran 13 a couple of times, but it was a little bit of a jump compared to what I was used to doing, and I was expecting my body to feel a little different over the course of that run. But all things considered, during the run itself, it felt really good. I probably could have gone a couple more, just again based on how I felt in the course of the run, but the next day, that being today, is where I'm starting to feel some of the effects. A little tougher to get out of bed, a little bit of hip soreness, but it's something that will probably mend over the course of the next couple days. I do not think I will be playing with fire again. I think that will be the one and only time that I go that route of saying I'm going to do X amount of miles for X amount of runs scored. That this will be a one and done. But transitioning into today being Friday, and the Giants beat the Baltimore Orioles 15-8. A lot to get into from today, and before getting into the game, we have to get to the biggest news of the game, that being that all-star closer Randy Rodríguez, who has been dealing with a right elbow sprain. And we kind of talked about this a couple days ago, how right elbow sprains are pretty synonymous as a prelude, as a pre-step to Tommy John. The Giants announced that Rodríguez had been recommended by 2 doctors to undergo Tommy John surgery. And Rodríguez, he hasn't officially said that he's going to go under the knife. He hasn't officially made that decision. He said the announcement rather, said that he'll take the weekend to decide that. But given the conversations with the doctors, that's the likeliest route now. As far as alternative options, Rodríguez told us after the game that, considering this is the first time he's ever had to go through this process, he wants to weigh every single option. He said that he's talked with his agent about potentially getting some injections. But this has been something that's bothered Rodríguez since last year. And if you remember last year, and I think I mentioned this in the video the other day, he missed about 6 weeks with right elbow inflammation, and this was something that just really never went away. And when Rodríguez was asked how he was able to pitch as well as he did while having to manage his pain, he credited the Giants training staff for getting his body, or his right elbow specifically, into a good enough position every day to where he was able to pitch pain-free. But he did mention that, in addition to this bothering him since last year, it has especially started to crop up the last couple days. He did reference the series in San Diego in particular is when it really started to crop up. So while Rodríguez has yet to make that decision, it is obviously very likely that he is going to undergo Tommy John surgery, which wouldn't just put him out for the remainder of this season, but it would put him out for the entirety, or at least in all likelihood for the entirety of next season, given that this is a 12 to 18-month timeline, and then we would be looking at Randy Rodríguez for the 2027 season. So just a very unfortunate break for Rodríguez, given what he was able to accomplish this year. And we've talked about it a lot, how he went from having some enticing stuff last year to being some guy that, before a lot of some of the bullpen shuffling, became a real fireman in this bullpen. And then eventually his role continued to grow, kept getting put into situations where, again, he had to put out fires. And then following the trade of Camilo Doval and Tyler Rogers, he elevated into the closer role, a role that he'd never pitched in, and then in between all of that, earns an invitation to the Midsummer Classic, to his first All-Star game, something that's a lot more rare to do as a non-closing reliever than it is as a closer. I can't remember what his numbers were at the All-Star break, but had to be something either in the low ones or the high zeros. Is that the way to say it? But a tough break for Rodríguez, and again, the likeliest timeline is that we won't see him pitch pitch again in the Giants uniform until the 2027 season. And with Rodríguez now injured, if you look at the current state of the Giants bullpen, it's a lot different than what it looked like at the beginning of the year. Now, the Giants bullpen entering today still had the second best ERA in all of baseball. That trailed only the San Diego Padres, and they're just absolutely elite bullpen. But the state of this bullpen looks a lot different than the state of the bullpen going into the month of July. Obviously, Rodríguez is currently injured. Eric Miller is currently still dealing with his left elbow strain. It was something that they caught early, but as of right now, he's still a no-throw. And again, given how tricky elbow sprains can get, it's probably unlikely that he's going to pitch for the remainder of the season. Camilo Doval was traded to the New York Yankees. Tyler Rogers was traded to the New York Mets. And so pretty much half of the Giants bullpen, as we knew it, going into the month of July, or even just looking at it for the majority of this first half, half of that bullpen as we know it just does not. Saying it doesn't exist, that's very traumatic, but it's just those cast of characters are no longer present. So, the Giants, as of right now, they're currently 67 and 68. They're still, mathematically it's not in their favor, but they're still kind of in the hunt. And so they are going to still have to rely on their bullpen to hold down leads when possible. And looking at this bullpen as currently constructed, this is going to have to be one of the Giants' priorities in the offseason, and perhaps there's some internal options there that they can play around with. But this will be one of their point of emphasis in the offseason because, considering how much Bob Melvin relied on his bullpen, how effective that bullpen was, it was very evident that if this is a pitching and defense team, that the other half of the pitching equation, aside from starters, is the bullpen. And there is somewhat of a foundation here. Obviously, Ryan Walker, he's elevated back in a closer role, and he's really turned it around over the course of these last couple months. Since his demotion, obviously began the season as the Giants closer, gets demoted in favor of Camilo Doval. But since June, I want to say it's like a 2.8 ERA, and since July in particular, it's a 1.7 ERA. So he's really found something with some of his mechanics. Jose Butto has really performed well since being traded from the Mets to the Giants. Eric Gage has a sub-1 ERA. Joey Lucchesi, I think, is a low 3 ERA, but it's been a bit rough in the month of August. And then again, the Giants do have some internal options that they can play around with. Obviously don't know what that's going to look like specifically. And maybe these next couple weeks also get used as an opportunity to see who could potentially factor into this bullpen next year. I would say as of right now, the only two certainties that I could say are both Walker and Butto, but then after that, it's kind of going to be up in the air and see who can really secure a spot, both for the remainder of this season as well as next season. Now, going into the game itself, evidenced by the fact that this was a 15-8 game, there was a lot of offense scored tonight. And if I just told you at the beginning of this game that the Giants were going to allow 8 runs, you'd probably say, that's probably a game that they lose. But their offense was firing on all cylinders from the go. Every member of the starting lineup had at least one hit. There were 5 players with multiple hits. There were 5 players with multiple RBIs. 7 guys reached base multiple times. Just one of those games where pretty much everything was going right. To kind of dive into some of the individual stat lines, Luis Matos had a career high 4 hits. Willie Adames had 4 hits as well. Drew Gilbert had a 2-hit day. He recorded his first ever double. But the definitive highlight offensively from today's game belongs to Dominic Smith, who hit the 107th homer, or 107th splash hit rather, in Oracle Park history. Semantics, the fact that the opposing ones don't count. But as far as the splash hits go, which being the Giant splash hits, is the 107th, obviously the first one of Dom Smith's career, and it's a pretty sweet moment for him too, considering the fact that growing up he was a very big Barry Bonds fan. He had an opportunity, I believe it was 2021 or 2020, to actually interview Barry Bonds for MLB Network. I assume that they've talked a fair amount, given the fact that Barry Bonds is still around from time to time, and splash hit, that's something that Bonds has done a fair amount of time during the time he was a Giant. I want to say it was 37, and Smith joined Bonds on that list of Giants who have done it tonight. And it was one of those, splash hits are always interesting as to when the player finds out, because obviously when you're down on the field level and you can't see through the bricks and it's not instantly shown on the Jumbotron, all you really know is that you hit a home run. And when Smith was kind of recounting the events, he obviously knew that he had a homer. The Orioles right fielder kind of took a couple half-hearted steps before giving up on it. The splash cannons or the water cannons, they went off before the ball even landed. So Smith knew that he homered, but he didn't know whether that ball had actually cleared the right field fence. And what was a pretty cool moment is that once the inning is over, they, every time a Giant homers, and once that inning is over, they do the whole bye-bye baby thing on the scoreboard. And what was really cool is that, obviously there was a lot of fans in here who didn't realize that Smith had hit a splash hit as well. So they show it on the scoreboard, and once everybody else gets to figure out and see the replay that the ball in fact went in the water, the crowd goes crazy, and Smith, by virtue, gets to be part of that and gets to see that, yes, indeed, he did hit a splash hit. And I think if I want to say I have the quote pulled up here. Let's see. Yeah. So what Smith said after the game was, one of the most iconic things in all the sports is seeing guys hit balls into that water, into McCovey Cove. The list of guys who have done it for this franchise, some legendary players. When I got the call to put on this uniform, I knew it was something I wanted to do. Every kid growing up dreams of those moments. So for it to actually happen, it was very surreal and something I'm going to cherish forever. And going back to the offensive side of things, obviously a season-high 15 runs for the Giants. Again, given the fact that that they did allow 8 runs, it was a night where they did need offense. Now, 15 runs, that is a lot, but this was one of the rare off nights for Robbie Ray, a true off night in the sense that he allowed a season-high 6 runs, goes 4 1/3 innings. It was just the 5th time this year that he hasn't pitched at least 5 innings. A little bit of a weird thing happened right before the game when he was warming up, where he was throwing his warm-up pitches, and then you see Bob Melvin, JP Martinez, and I believe it was Dave Greshner all go out to the mound to kind of check on him. And when you see the starting pitcher getting checked on before he actually throws an in-game pitch, that kind of puts a couple alarm bells in the head. But all that had happened was that some old skin had ripped off from Ray's finger. They just had to get that touched up, and then he was good to go from there. And I will say an encouraging aspect of tonight's game from Ray's perspective, despite the earned runs, is that his velocity did tick up. It was 93.7 on the night, and that's notable considering his start against the Padres. I want to say it was 92.1, and then his start against, I want to say it was the Brewers. I wasn't there for his last start, but his most recent start prior to tonight, it was down to like 91, which, when you get to this point in the season, and especially considering that he's thrown just a hell of a lot more innings this year compared to the previous 2, starts to be some concern. Just is there wear and tear on the arm as the season goes along? But Ray did say after the game that there was some mechanical stuff that he wanted to work on, and despite the fact that the results themselves weren't that great, he was able to get his velocity, again, back up to that 93, 94, 95 mile per hour range, and get it back to a place where he's more normally accustomed.